Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, September 28th, 2023. Time for another show. There was a Republican debate that I didn't watch, so we need to discuss that and the fact that I didn't watch it. You already knew I wasn't going to watch it, but I was extremely busy last night on top of everything else. So not only did I not watch it, I didn't even watch people watching it, which is usually what I do. Although I see people discussing it this morning, so apparently there's no shortage of people who want to tell you how bad the debate really was, and that's good news for us because, well, we're sort of in that business. So, fantastic. I guess we're going to be millionaires because everybody wants to talk about this. Not really sure how we monetize this. Probably through, I guess we should call ourselves KagroInTheMorning.com and say that we have an AI chatbot. And then, I don't know, all of a sudden money, I guess. So I don't know why I've been missing out this whole time, but there it was. The solution was staring me in the face the whole time. All right. Well, plenty to get to today. Greg Dworkin already ramping up and providing samples of where we're going. Plus, there's a procedural puzzle for us to unravel as well, although I think that part of the unraveling is done by some of the threads that he's sent from some other expert congressional observers. We brought in some outside ones so that we would have real experts here today. And let's see, I also want to make sure that I get all of Justice's hints here. Ah, yes, right. There's the hint about Commander, who not the one that plays for the Washington football team called the Commanders, but Commander Biden's dog, not the dog they sent away because he was biting all the Secret Service agents, but the other dog that they didn't send away who's biting all the Secret Service agents. That's, I don't know. It's a dog. What are you going to do about it, right? Well, at any rate, I guess poor Secret Service agents, although maybe he's only biting the poor ones, that is, those who perform their jobs poorly. I really don't know. I don't want to be casting aspersions on victims of these dog bite crimes, but somebody needed to get bitten after the Secret Service was allowing weirdo fascies to point guns at Trump's belly for a photo op. Although I'm a little less concerned with the outcome in that situation than I would be with anybody else. It just seems like they were doing a bad job, and maybe Commander should bite them. Anyway, let's see. We also have, continuing coverage of the bad coverage of Donald Trump's staged rally the other day in Michigan, in which, I guess, I don't know. As we said yesterday, I mean, he would have had actors portray the union workers at the rally like he did with his campaign launch, except the actors were on strike also, so they wouldn't do it. But this really does present a real problem. I haven't done a lot of great in-depth reading about the rally and the way people covered it, but I'm watching other people. People are like holding their heads in despair because major newspapers are covering this thing as if he really was doing the thing that he was trying to stage. And everybody knew that he was staging, and it was in the reports. It's just, he's not addressing union workers, and the workers he's addressing were not affected by the strike. He just wanted newspapers to cover it as though that was the case, and then they went and did it. Like, I don't know. He addresses union workers. No, he didn't. He addresses striking workers or workers affected by the strike. No, he didn't. Do you think I could get past an editor by saying the syphilitic Donald Trump exposed himself to the crowd and began gyrating furiously? He didn't do that, but could I report that he did? Well, what if somebody wanted that to be the story? Wouldn't that be enough? Because that's what Donald Trump wanted to be. Well, that wasn't what Donald Trump wanted to be the story, although I'm sure he could get away with it as well. But there's no explanation for it, and everybody's just holding their heads and smashing them against the walls, saying, I just don't understand how that could possibly have been the story. Well, anyway, let's see. It looks like there won't be that much, as it happens, about the debate because it sucked that bad. So that's even Greg says the whole thing was garbage, and we don't have a great deal to say about it. And that's fine by me. We can absolutely proceed by ignoring what went on, except for whatever the lowlights reels are. And we can share some of that just so that we have cultural touchstones about the debate. And if anybody said anything really funny that will endure, I haven't heard what it would be. So at any rate, good morning, Greg. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'll give you a couple of lines from the debate that I think
you're a union
will
auto
last
worker,
a little
right?
bit.
Oh, okay. Well, at least one of them. Were they all union auto workers at the debate suddenly?
No, they started with that, but they quickly went on. This was a Fox News Dana Perino debate, and everybody looked bad.
I
don't mean that they performed badly in the debate. I mean, they looked bad. Too much makeup.
Ooh. What? That can be no such thing.
On high definition TV. Painted eyebrows. I mean, they just looked bad.
Yee. Yuck. Yeah. It's a new Nixon problem for TV
exactly.
debates.
DeSantis looked like he should have shaved and he was wearing too much makeup, for example. I'm not even going to get into, the moderators who I think were pretty bad. I mean, to give you an idea how bad the moderators were, Dana Perino ended the debate with a question of like, if this were, the island, who would you vote off?
It puts them on a level they can understand.
People refused to even participate in the question and said, this is a really stupid question. I'm not doing this.
Oh, I guess is that because the answer is Trump, but they don't want to say it, or
I don't know.
They didn't want to have a fight with somebody locally.
So there was that line. There was Chris Christie saying Joe Biden's a bad guy because he's sleeping with a union person from the teachers union.
Oh,
go figure that. And Mike Pence said, I am too.
Wait, what?
My wife is a teacher.
Oh.
I've been sleeping with her for a long time. It was like.
Oh, okay. Now,
moments.
all right.
I'm just trying to give you an idea of.
All right.
And those are the highlights of the debate. The other highlight of the debate was Nikki Haley turning to Vivek Ramaswamy, who everybody hates.
Yeah.
And is dropping in the polls. And said, every time I talk to you, I feel like I've gotten a little stupider.
Well, talking to him is a stupid thing to do.
Was that really funny? I mean, every question was answered by a practiced zinger, which usually fell very flat. And it was just boring.
Let's dispense with the fact that they were boring zingers or something.
Yeah. So, that's as much as I'm going to say about the debate.
That is plenty.
Do anything. It didn't. It was a waste of 2 hours if anybody watched it. I just dropped in and out for the highlights.
Okay.
Usually what I do with these debates is do something else and put it on audio.
I see.
And so I can, hear and that way I don't have to look at them, and it's just easier to tolerate. But even then, I had to turn it off after a few minutes. It's like, this is awful. Okay. And then I was watching Twitter, as you say, watching the watchers.
Right.
And they were saying things like, this is awful. Like, people like Mike Murphy. I've been watching debates for 30 years. This is the worst one I've ever seen. Lots of comments like that.
Yes. Well, I've been warning all these people that they need to turn these things off and that they were just getting worse. But it takes a while for them to notice the temperature in the pan rising, I guess. And
right.
I felt it immediately.
So let's talk a little bit about the Trump speech yesterday. It wasn't that bad. I mean, the network TV stations were handling it like she said, both are going to speak to auto workers. In fact, the Michigan papers were a lot better about it. And in fact, Dave Weigel, for example, pulled up a Jacobin article.
Oh.
And said, this is the best thing you can read about it.
Wow.
The headline there is, Trump is speaking tonight in Michigan at a non-union auto shop as a guest of its boss.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, that's what it was. And that's how it should be covered.
All right. Well, I mean, I had no doubt that somebody would say the right thing about it. It's just, why not say it everywhere? This is factual.
It's just
news.
Factual. Craig Mauger.
It's not a spin. He chose that for that reason.
Factual because, people don't in the media. Craig Mauger, I think, is the Detroit Free Press. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's unclear how many auto workers attended Trump's speech. A person in the crowd with the union members for Trump sign acknowledged he wasn't a union member, and a person with an auto workers for Trump sign said he wasn't an auto worker. So, basically, Trump's speech was about as authentic as the valuation on one of his properties.
Yeah, that's true. By the way, there are actually existing photos that you can put those signs and the people holding them side by side with white people holding blacks for Trump signs. And of course, you have to love the fact that it says blacks as opposed to black people,
Yeah.
which, that's what they are.
Well, they may as well just hold
They
the sign that
weren't.
says,
They were
I'm
white.
black.
Yeah, right. But
Because I want you to pick me out in the crowd.
You have to. Yeah, never mind that I'm
Otherwise, if
white.
I don't say it on the sign, your eyes are just going to glaze over and not see me like you normally do. So I have to have a sign that says, look at me.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a white supremacists for Trump sign, that's like invisible. Okay, well.
So I just want to give you an idea, what's going on here.
I'm just. It's weird that people just don't say, "Hey, this whole thing is fake," and that's the headline. Like, it's interesting that he had a fake rally. That's okay.
Yeah.
You should
Trump
say
has
so.
a fake rally. That's basically what happened, and that's how it should be perceived. And thank you. I may use that tomorrow as the pundit roundup
all right.
headline.
Well, I like to
'Cause
save
why
you
not?
some work. Sure.
Let's see. Craig Moore covers state government and politics in Michigan for Detroit News, not Detroit
Okay.
Free Press, but the Detroit News.
All right. Thank you, Detroit News.
Okay. Let's see. What else did he say? Oh, Donald Trump also said at that rally, UAW negotiations don't mean as much as you think. He also said they're striking for the wrong things. So, how well that's going to resonate with union workers, I don't think so.
All right.
The UAW doesn't think so either.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, by the way, good news coverage would also have said also fake at this rally is Trump's skin tone. Just wanted to let you know that.
Right.
And a lot of you got COVID because of that.
Right. So, the real story, the real news, let's talk about the shutdown a little bit. A lot to talk about there, including procedure, as you pointed out in the intro to the show. Punch Bowl News had something that annoyed me, so I thought I'd tell you that.
Good job, Punch Bowl.
Yeah.
Okay.
McCarthy is desperately trying to drag Biden into the government shutdown fray, rhetorically and substantively. Why? Biden's an easy target for the California Republican. Remember, Punch Bowl News is essentially McCarthy's spokesperson. The president's poll numbers are terrible. Okay,
Well,
short diversion. They're not.
Oh, okay. All right.
Right.
I mean, even if they were, it doesn't really make sense, but okay.
G. Elliott Morris pointed this out because a YouGov poll that came out yesterday has Biden 45, Trump 40. So that's +5 for Biden.
Not terrible.
A poll's a poll's a poll, and this far out doesn't mean all that much. That's not the point. The point is what he said about it. He said something to note about this particular number in this particular poll is that YouGov has more controls for partisan non-response than most, if not all, other pollsters. Your mileage may vary, and n equal 1, meaning this poll. But to me, the statistician who runs 538 these days, G. Elliott Morris, says, it suggests to me the race is more stable and more Biden than the conventional wisdom.
Okay.
And then I also gave you a chart showing how YouGov has been showing the race all along. It's basically fluctuating back and forth pretty close between them. +5 is the highest for Biden it's been. But G. Elliott Morris said, yeah, all that's true. But my point is none of these YouGov results is 51-42, the way the Washington Post ABC News is. And a methodological thing there, Washington Post ABC News is using random digit dialing. They're not using panels. They're not using internet. They're using old-fashioned, we did this 30 years ago, on everybody's landline methods. I don't think they're capturing the kids, and that may be the reason why the ABC Washington Post poll consistently has Trump 5 or 6 or 9 points ahead of where everybody else has it.
Okay.
So I just thought, yeah, and they themselves say they're an outlier, and they understand it, and it was part of their story. So why would Punch Bowl say Biden's poll numbers are terrible? Because they don't understand polling. They claim they do. They claim they're experts in everything Washington, but they want to because it's a conventional wisdom. In fact, it's not true.
Well, it's run by the people who made their bones in the business saying George W. Bush was a popular president.
And that there'd be a red wave.
Yeah.
Okay, so none of that is true.
Okay.
But what is true, and this is corroborated by the Washington Post, McCarthy's new shutdown strategy, shifting the blame. So it's true. He wants to blame Biden. That's why he wants to get Biden involved. Biden's not biting. Or as Punch Bowl puts it, why in God's name would Biden engage here? Biden's already negotiated with them. They got debt limit stuff. That's what they're reneging on now. There's no reason for Biden to do anything right now. This is McCarthy's problem. McCarthy can suffer on his own. McConnell doesn't want to get involved either. Neither does Schumer.
Okay. Here
is your drowning situation. Here's an anchor if you would like. Otherwise, you're on your own.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that he thought, okay, well, if I can blame it on Biden, I guess I will.
So in the meantime, he's trying to get more votes.
Didn't realize that was an
option. By pulling everything out of any of his suggested appropriations bill, like defense, that get the hardliners upset, like he's not going to fund Ukraine at all anymore. And whether or not they can actually get these things passed, the more he pulls, the more the hardliners are saying, I don't really care what you do. This is nice, but I'm not voting for a CR. Okay. So if they're not voting for a CR, the government shuts down. If the government shuts down, how do you reopen the government? Well, this is frustrating not just us. It's frustrating some of these so-called moderate Republicans. What's the definition of a moderate Republican? It's a conservative Republican in a Biden district.
Okay.
So if you average those two things, you get moderate.
All right. I mean,
there's no other explanation. They call Nancy Mace a moderate. Nancy Mace complains about everything and votes right along with the hardliners and every single thing that comes up.
So
she's not a moderate.
Moderates are Republicans who, I don't know, I was going to say maybe feel guilt.
Who are in Biden plus districts who don't want to be called hardliners.
Yeah, okay.
That's all they are.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I'm a hardliner. I just don't like to be called that because it's dangerous for me in my district.
Yeah, exactly. So here's a piece from the New York Times, which is, highlighting this. And the procedural thing that we're going to get to is the previous question, and whether we do that before or after the break depends on how long-winded I am about setting this all up. So this story is vulnerable Republicans try to head off blame for shutdown.
All right.
Mainstream House Republicans representing districts won by Biden have explored a bipartisan stopgap measure as right-wing lawmakers push Congress toward a shutdown. So the Problem Solvers Caucus or these guys, or maybe they're the same thing, can get together with Democrats and discuss what they would like to do. A clean CR, which is to say just fund the government at current levels for 30 to 45 days, or a CR with a Ukraine provision that would make it a dirty CR. But you do that because it's more likely to get approved by the Senate, or just even taking any vehicle and putting the Senate CR into it once the Senate CR passes, which I don't know if it has yet, but it's probably by Sunday because Rand Paul's holding it up.
Yeah.
So you talked about cloture in the Senate yesterday on the show.
We talk about cloture in the Senate every day on the show. Sure.
But the House doesn't have filibusters, so it's not a question of cloture. It's a question of if you have somebody like Mike Lawler who wants to do something, be it accept the Senate CR when it comes over, be it put up his own bilateral problem-solving third world, suggestion. The question is, what's the vehicle to do that? And a lot of the experts who look at this say, well, the fastest way to do this is to simply defeat the previous question. And I looked at that and said, what?
Always defeat all questions, I say, but start with the previous ones because they came first, and then defeat all the other ones after that.
So this actually came up as a theoretical, esoteric, down the rabbit hole sort of discussion, and I was swallowing it and saying, I'm going to have to go look up what this is. So Andrew Solider said, as a matter of fact, GOP Representative Don Bacon, who I believe is from Nebraska and is one of those so-called moderates.
Okay.
A problem solver caucus leader says they've spoken with Democratic leadership about defeating the previous question to force a vote on their CR. We're offering an opportunity for a bipartisan landing spot, so all of a sudden it's not theoretic. Axios had a piece called Republicans Grasp at Straws to Stop Government Shutdown. One option on the table includes Republicans teaming up with Democrats to use a parliamentary tool referred to as the previous question, which, if defeated, would allow Democrats to effectively force a vote on a bipartisan funding stopgap. And so I went and turned to the expert on all of this, the expert of experts, Speaker Kevin McCarthy. His Republican Cloakroom website has this on the previous question. The previous question is another tool of the minority that affords the opportunity to offer amendments to the rule being considered on the floor.
Right.
When voting on the previous question, a member is voting on ordering the previous question, and if it's ordered, then we continue with a vote on adoption of the rule. But, and here's where it gets interesting, if the PQ is not ordered, which is the same thing as defeating the previous question,
Yes.
the minority would control the House floor for 1 hour of debate on the legislative item that was offered in the PQ. So to me, I looked at that and said on Twitter, well, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. I really don't understand any of it. But to me, defeating the previous question is a way to tell the speaker to sit down and shut up. You've lost control of the floor. The minority is going to make all the amendments and change what you tried to do. And you can't do anything about it if we have enough votes. First, you have to defeat the previous question. And if that same coalition then has enough votes to defeat any maneuver that the speaker tries to do to gain the floor back, or at least stop what the minority is doing, then you win. That's my understanding of it.
Yes, I think that's an essential part of it. Yeah. By the way, in setting this whole thing up where you were saying, well, the House doesn't have the filibuster the way the Senate does. The reason the House doesn't have the filibuster is they have a previous question motion. That's what prevents the House from operating with a filibuster. And the previous question, like, well, what question? What are we talking about? It's the question then pending for debate on the House floor, and in
which is typically a rule.
Yeah, at that point it's a rule. And what it is when they say defeat the previous question, what it is someone's making a motion to have a vote on the previous question, the one we've been debating this whole time. The rule: if you move the previous question and it passes, the motion passes, then basically what happens is, okay, we've dispensed with the debate. We've decided to finally vote on the question, which is the rule. And if you defeat the motion to move the previous question, then you say, all right, well, we've decided not to vote on the rule at this point. What have we decided to do? And the underlying House rules at that point is, well, if we're not moving to a vote, then that means we are moving to more debate. And the default rule, because we don't have a rule for governing this debate, is there's an hour of debate and it's amendable under the 5-minute rule, and it could go on forever. That's one thing. But the other thing is, yes, then you get to say, all right, the rules committee from the speakers, the rule from the speakers committee, the rules committee, is garbage, and we want to substitute a different one. And we've learned in the past that controlling the contents of the rule essentially can control the outcome of the bill. That's why they never want the previous question motion to be defeated.
Right. In fact, this is Matt Glassman, academic, writing exactly that. Why is defeating the previous question on a rule so much more powerful and dangerous than defeating the rule itself? And the answer is defeating a rule is a negative agenda setting. You just won't do that. You'll do something else.
That's not going to be the rule.
While defeating the previous question is a positive agenda setting, the leaders that brought the rule can't set the agenda, and that's the end. You block them from doing something, but that's it when you defeat a rule. But when you defeat the previous question on a rule, you block a vote on the rule, and so you leave it on the floor open to amendment. You can propose an amendment, and if your coalition holds together, you can pass your amendment. You set the agenda, and that's why it terrifies leaders so much more than a rule defeat. And so, there you have it. And Molly Reynolds, another expert, says that's an awfully good explanation, but she's very skeptical that will happen simply because it never happens.
Oh, well, I mean,
she thinks the old-fashioned way is that, they'll do some sort of agreement to work with Democrats. And she says, and this is where it got fun because it really got into the weeds, as much as I would love to see a vote on overruling the chair on a question of what's germane to a special rule, I don't think it's going to end that way.
Oh, okay. It's unlikely, to be sure, but this is a unique situation. There's never been a speaker who, with 15 ballots to get to the speaker, and and who's been held hostage, and who there's a faction out there I mean, I guess if you defeat the previous question and there's now the ability to amend the rule and anybody can offer an amendment and there's no real rules because it's never happened before about what makes a germane amendment to a rule. I mean, Matt Gaetz can offer an amendment to the rule that says if we pass this rule, the speaker's chair is vacated.
And then the speaker or whoever's in the chair can say that's not germane, and then you get the vote on it.
Right. And you say,
I mean, that's the whole
If you
point.
lose that vote,
So
then that's effectively
but
vacating
you have
the chair.
to have your coalition
Yes.
together
I mean,
to
if you
deal
lose,
with the
you lose.
germane opposition, the germane objection.
Yes. So when somebody
Because
says
gonna
that's
come
not,
up. That's what Molly
you
Reynolds
can't put that
was
in a
referring
rule.
to it. And Matt Glassman says, I just had a vision of somebody moving follow me here. Someone moving the PQ on an appeal of the chair's ruling against germaneness of an amendment to a special rule brought on by the defeat of the previous question. And I don't even know how you're supposed to vote on this.
Right. You don't know where you are in the cycle. But,
Right.
I mean,
and then he
I don't
brings
think
up the
Gaetz
fact
can
that there's
organize
a
it,
strong
but-
and good norm on the House floor that staffers don't lobby or advise members on how to vote. But in this case,
Oh, yes, they do.
of course they do.
Yeah. I mean, you hand them an actual card that says yes, 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 no, no on it at the beginning of the day.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this could actually come up, and that's why we're going over it. It's not just, this is like one of those insider things, like, sufficient second and stuff like that. This actually may come up because it may be the only way to get the government working.
Yeah. Well, maybe. One thing you don't usually advise them on ahead of time is crazy, unexpected procedural questions. Those they have to call the office and say, "What is this?" And you got to explain it to them. I don't know who comes up with that idea. The idea that staff never advises them on how to vote. What? That's the job. Okay. Well, they never did it. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What was our previous question before we left? Are we done with that?
No, we have to defeat it.
Okay.
So,
down with the previous question.
See, stepping back from the nomenclature and the confusing terminology and
They
such.
should have named it something else.
Back when Kevin McCarthy had 15 votes to get him to be the Speaker of the House, we said the next day on the show, he's lost control of the floor. He just doesn't know it. And the reason is he gave up control on the Rules Committee, otherwise known as the Speaker's Committee, which sets the agenda on the floor. And setting the agenda on the floor is the single most important thing that the Speaker does. One could argue it's the only thing the Speaker does, because the Speaker doesn't actually vote on things usually.
Yes.
They raise a lot of money, but they basically set the agenda.
Yeah, it's funny that we say that, even though it's really the job of the majority leader to actually set the agenda. But it's usually, well, I'll break your arms if you don't set the agenda this way. Oh.
Well, if you don't, you're not going to be a majority leader.
Right.
I'm going to talk to the caucus and get rid of you.
Right. But if you have no
control. It's like being the parliamentarian. It's the parliamentarian's job to tell them what they can or can't do. Of course, if you don't like the answer, you fire the parliamentarian.
That's true, too. Yes. Okay. Yes. So here we are watching him lose control.
So he lost control of the floor during his election. It was only a matter of time where it mattered and it was going to come to a head. And here it is. Now, there's been several times that he couldn't get stuff done, and we said he's hapless and he's feckless and he's lacking feck, and all this sort of stuff.
He should probably feck himself more.
More. He should get more feck.
Yeah.
So, but it's hard to get more than he already is, because now he's got to open the government or at least not allow it to shut down. But he's going to shut it down because Rand Paul and others on the Senate side, who are also radicals, have zero interest in actually helping people. It was weird when you talk to the hardliners and interview them. They say things like, oh, you're giving me the story of Granny getting hurt by this shutdown again. Don't you realize there's 330 million people in this country? That was an actual answer by one of them.
Wow. I mean, what? Okay.
We're doing this for everybody, not just the people that are getting hurt. I love that answer. I hope they keep saying that.
Okay.
Right up until the November election in 2024. But that was their answer. They don't care. And that's why the government shuts down. That's why you have to either convince McCarthy he has no other choice. That's why McCarthy's waiting to the last minute or just beyond it to even think about it. And that's why if McCarthy is still too scared to lose his job to allow the government to reopen, then you have to do a defeat previous question thing. I think that's faster than a discharge petition, which has to ripen for 30 days. And, they already have one cooking. But, it just you can't leave the government shut down that long.
Okay. So, yeah. So the after having explained the previous question, I guess the plan they're floating is the moderates or the fake moderates or problem solvers or maybe some Democrats and some Republicans have a plan for a CR, or even they just want to use the Senate CR. McCarthy is currently saying, I refuse to bring the Senate CR, which isn't ready yet anyway, to the floor, even if they hand it to us, wrapped in a bow. I'm not going to do it. And they think these either moderates or problem solvers or whatever they're calling themselves, they figure if we defeat the previous question and thereby get an hour of floor time to amend the rule or offer a different one, we'll offer whatever we need to offer in order to authorize bringing the Senate CR to the floor, despite the fact that the speaker says he's not going to do it. And
yes.
And it may be a case of McCarthy having finally read the pundit roundup or something and say, I need, yes, that's the right thing to do. Now make me do it. I'll stand here and say, no, so that Gates doesn't vacate the chair, but I will strongly hint that there's a way to make me do it anyway by defeating the previous question. But it also ends up making you look like a loser.
And the rest of my caucus and say, and I had no choice.
Yeah, nothing I can do.
There's nothing I could do about it.
All the Democrats voted to defeat the previous question, and 6 Republicans joined them because they're problem solvers or whatever. But, so if you defeat the previous question and you get to have an extra hour, and then you can hold together the coalition to vote in favor of a rule that would allow the Senate CR to the floor, it happens over McCarthy's objection. It passes, the government reopens, and he says, I didn't do it.
And that's exactly right. And that is just so Kevin McCarthy, because then he could say, look, we closed because Joe Biden wouldn't talk to me. And we opened because of those 6 problem solvers. None of this is my fault.
Yeah.
Don't blame
those
me.
Stupid solvers.
Let me keep my job.
But I mean, just I guess in the same.
It's just that everybody knows that that's the play, so I don't know how that works.
I mean, it could work. I don't know whether they'll actually be able to do it. It's a little weird for them and a little scary, I'm sure, but, and there's also the possibility that Matt Gaetz will say, I don't believe that as an explanation. You're out of here. Okay. It's not so bad. But
Gaetz would say, I don't believe that explanation. You're right. Hold on. Let me make this phone call to Trump and ask him what he wants to do.
Yeah. He says he doesn't believe this explanation either. So
he says he doesn't believe either. You're out of here.
Yeah, I read this in the bathroom. And
I called him.
You're gone. I mean, it's logically it could work, but you have people who just are saying, no, it doesn't matter what's in the CR. I'm going to vote no anyway. And the same people will say, I don't even care. I'm going to vote to vacate the GR anyhow. I always wanted to do it.
I don't know why they say this
Sounds fun.
government's dysfunctional.
Can't really see any way clear to making that true. But it will be interesting. It'll be historical, but it'll just look like more gobbledygook to the rest of us on C-SPAN. You will now all know exactly what happened, but it won't look any different.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, so let's move to a different topic, and at least until it comes up again.
All right.
And as you know, Donald Trump had a court say he was a fraud and that he was fraudulently lying about how much his properties were worth. And the judge did not, as the right-wingers would have you believe, do their own evaluation of things like Mar-a-Lago. They didn't say Mar-a-Lago is not worth $1.5 billion. It's only worth $27 to $18 million. It's Florida who said that, and they're just citing it. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff in the judge's report that was of interest. We mentioned one of them, a lot of references to Saudi Arabia, for example. Saudi Arabia would buy it at any price I want, he said. Trump said.
Maybe.
So what does that mean?
I don't know. I mean, I was wondering about that.
But it's pretty clear that Trump Organization itself is in trouble. This is David K. Johnson, occasional friend and guest on the show, who says in his D.C. report, judge gives Trump Organization the corporate death penalty. That's a lovely headline. Donald Trump is no longer in business.
Of that headline.
Worse, the self-proclaimed multi-billionaire may soon be personally bankrupt as a result, stripped of just about everything because for years he engaged in calculated bank fraud and insurance fraud by inflating the value of his properties, the judge ruled Tuesday. Now, David K. Johnson has been following Trump financial stuff for decades.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So he's quite familiar with all of this stuff.
Yeah, inside and out.
Under the New York general business law, you can only do business in your own name as a sole proprietor with a business license, which the state calls a business certificate. All of Trump's businesses were corporations or partnerships that require business certificates. The civil fraud case was brought by Letitia James. The evidence and issues were so clear-cut, Judge Arthur Engoron ruled on Tuesday there was no reason to waste the court's time in a trial. In a 35-page decision, Engoron also excoriated Trump and his lawyers for making nonsense arguments, so badly misquoting legal cases that they turned the law upside down. For 5 Trump lawyers were each fined $7,500 for making frivolous arguments. And the point of that, by the way, isn't the tiny amount of money they were fined. It's the fact that they were fined at all and called out by the judge, which in legal world, as David K. Johnson's put it, a judge calling a lawyer's argument frivolous is the equivalent of saying it's no better than nonsense from a drunk in a bar.
Yeah, well, good. It's about time. And as I always say, it's like having third graders do the arguing. Well, Your Honor, we the people, it says right here in the Constitution, and I'm a person, so you're working for me.
David K. Johnson goes one step further and said, this is a MAGA thing.
He's
this is make attorneys get attorneys because these lawyers may find themselves getting disbarred over this.
That's right. And they may also find that there are no lawyers that will take their case because Robert Costello tells them, hey, you're not going to get paid.
Yeah. So Trump lawyers Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman are in the process of getting disbarred. Mm-hmm. So it's not crazy to say that. So you can't just keep giving frivolous nonsense stuff to the courts. They get upset about it. They call you out. And that makes you, prone, attending, possibly subject to sanction.
So judges have hammers in their hands. Watch
he was
out.
Pretty straightforward about this, and it's so different than, let's say, how the New York Times handled it.
Oh.
New York Times. Was Trump's real estate hype fraud or business as usual?
Both.
How about both?
Yeah.
Right, and how about the business as usual part doesn't really matter to a court? And basically that's what this article says, right? Okay. You can discuss about all you want to, but in the business world, the question is whether anybody was materially harmed, and therefore does this really matter? Because that's like it happens all the time. And that's Trump's argument. And the court said, we're not buying
right.
that. We're going by fact. And they give us an example, which I think really helps to put the New York Times ridiculous argument in perspective, is that we'll give you an example of what he did. It isn't just a question you're arguing what Mar-a-Lago is really worth.
Okay.
right?
Which we shouldn't.
As an example of how he committed fraud, he lives in an 11,000 square foot apartment.
Okay.
I don't know how many square feet your home is,
Less.
but it's probably less than that.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Trump claimed that apartment was 30,000 square feet. Seems like a little thing, but that is a clear, factual lie.
Yeah.
You can measure the apartment.
You can do that.
You know the size. You're saying it's not what it is. You're lying. It's fraud.
Yeah, right.
If you're using that to evaluate the apartment. Or, actually, when it comes to paying taxes, it's only 750 square feet.
Right, yeah. So
and he did both.
He did.
And so, the judge had a lot of instances of this and said, this is an example of a clear-cut, this isn't just business as usual.
How many square
He's
feet
lying.
is this apartment? There's a real
and
answer
it's also
to
not
this.
negotiable. It's not arguable. 11,000 isn't 30,000.
That is true. It seems true anyway. These are not union workers. That's not 30,000 square feet.
Right. And so to really put a fine point on it in a really fun way, Philip Bump has a piece here in the Washington Post, and it's a tool. You can put in your own numbers and see what you get.
Hey, all right.
How much would your house be worth if the Trump organization owned it?
That's fantastic. A good calculator. All right.
So you take your house
and
you stick it in.
Let's do
that. And let's say, just for the sake of argument, pick a number 400,000 or greater.
Am I right?
Pick one.
Oh, me.
Yeah.
$1 million.
Okay,
Sure.
$1 million. $1 million. Not evil.
Right.
Okay. Here are your Trump inflated values. If you were to inflate the value of the extent that the value of Trump Tower was inflated, your $1 million home would be worth $2,728,000, which is more than double.
Hey, all right.
If we apply the level of inflation used for Mar-a-Lago, not just Trump Tower,
yes.
your $1 million home would be worth anywhere between $15 and $34 million.
This is great. I'm rich.
To give you an idea of what he's doing.
Yes.
Doing.
Sure.
Okay. And if we use the level of inflation applied to the property at Seven Springs, your $1 million becomes $9 million. Using the inflation applied to the property at 40 Wall Street, your $1 million house is anywhere between 2.6 to 1.3 million.
Okay.
And then there are the golf clubs, inflating your $1 million to the same degree as the inflation applied to the Briarcliff Golf Club. It's worth $4 million. And for the club in Los Angeles, it would be $3.5 million. So you get an idea that Mar-a-Lago itself was inflated way beyond anything else.
Yeah, that's the best.
But all of them were double or triple inflated.
Okay.
And so now you get a sense of what we're talking about here.
Yes. Plus, I lied in the first number, so that was pretty good. I did a good job.
That wasn't really what your apartment was worth. You did it, Trump. But let's say
I didn't know what I was
townhouse, your home is worth $400,000. That's
okay. That would be closer.
It's still a big enough home, but not outrageous if you live in the Northeast, for example.
Yeah.
So that would mean you'd get a range of 6 to 13 million for Mar-a-Lago.
Well,
and that feels like,
go.
okay, I understand that. I know what my house is worth, and you're telling me that my house, pretending it was worth 400,000, mine isn't, it's less than that, but let's pretend that that's what it is. You're telling me my $400,000 house is really worth $13 million.
So
for the purposes
my $1 million is not
I want to sell
guess.
it, and so give me tax breaks.
Right. And then when come tax time and they say, well, we tax you based on the value of your house, you say
it's worth
$816.
$816.
Yeah. So he's been doing that for quite a while, and he's been able to amass a real estate portfolio because of that. And now the judge is saying, well, maybe we ought to take that whole thing away because it was fraud from the start. That's pretty
Newtown, where
aggressive.
I live, was settled in the 1600s. And there's a small section of Newtown within walking distance of where I live.
Yes.
Called Dodging Town.
Dodging Town.
Next town over is Bethel.
Okay.
And the reason it's called Dodging Town, or so town lore has it, is that when the tax collectors went to this area to collect the taxes, they'd say if it was a Newtown tax collector, they'd say, we live in Bethel, right down the road.
Okay.
And when the Bethel people came, they'd say, well, we're part of Newtown. We don't know your taxes. And so it came to be known as Dodgingtown. And, Trump could have grown up there.
Right. And Clarence Thomas will say, well, or was it Alito? That's a long tradition that goes all the way back to the founding, so that's actually legal, whereas these newfangled things that came into being in the last 100 years are overruled.
Exactly right.
Well, it's an interesting game. I like the calculator thing. That seems fun. And, I guess that's the way you make yourself into a billionaire. But, I mean, if you can just make up the first number, it helps a lot.
Right. Oh, by the way, this from the New York Times was covering the UAW dueling events.
Yes.
Between Trump and Biden. And I just noticed it, and I pulled it out because I really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. And, if their coverage is like this from now until November 2024, I'll be very happy.
Oh.
It's going to be a long road to next November, they write. The first step started this week. Biden and Trump traveled to Michigan one day after the other. And then this paragraph. Their dueling styles were on clear display as the two men tried to woo voters affected by the UAW strike. Mr. Biden has campaigned on a message of bolstering the middle class, protecting democratic norms, and countering China. Mr. Trump, a criminal defendant several times over, has focused on vindicating himself, channeling conservative grievances, and promoting America First policies. Mr. Trump prefers a boisterous event that lets him take center stage. Mr. Biden has opted for small fundraisers where he can burnish his Scranton Joe persona. That's okay. You want to cover it that way? That's fine. Make it clear. Trump, by the way, has been indicted 91 times.
That's helpful.
Was also at this speech and said this. Trump, who the courts clearly say is a fraud, was talking about some of the things he's done in the past, which in fact aren't true. Or Trump, who is according to the courts, a sex offender, had things to say about abortion. There's nothing wrong with covering it. That it's true.
That is helpful. I would have gone a step further. Like when they say both of them went to woo workers affected by the strike. Biden went.
One invited by the workers, the other invited by the boss.
Right. And I would have said, well, so what happened eventually? That's the goal. And so Biden went to Michigan and spoke to workers affected by the strike. And then Trump followed and went to Michigan and spoke to workers not affected by the strike, even though he said he was headed there to speak to workers affected by the strike. Right. Oh, all right. Well, he did not actually do that. They both wanted to woo workers affected by the strike. Biden's methodology was to do that, whereas Trump's methodology was to not do that. And to the extent that you had hoped that they were going to speak to workers affected by the strike, only one of them did it.
Right. So, some outlets play it better than others. This one is the Detroit News. Their headline is Donald Trump, UAW negotiations, quote, don't mean as much as you think, end quote.
Oh, well, you know what I think.
Yeah. The Detroit Free Press has 5 takeaways as the UAW strike captures the political stage, which is sort of neutral, which is too bad. Now, speaking to workers amid UAW strike, Trump blasts Biden in transition to electric vehicles. Former President Donald Trump, speaking Wednesday at a non-union plant in Macomb County amid a UAW strike against the Detroit Three, delivered a rollicking bellicose speech to workers against automakers and the President Joe Biden administration's efforts to push a transition to electric vehicles. So I think they honed in what Trump is doing, which is to say electric vehicles are bad. But as other people have pointed out, Trump's logic is that China makes electric vehicles, therefore electric vehicles are bad, therefore the way to counter China is for America not to make electric vehicles, therefore fill in the blank.
Yeah, I don't know exactly right. It's a sort of an underwear gnomes thing. I mean, I think the workers, I can't speak to what the people at the non-union shop believe, I guess, and I guess I can't really speak for the UAW workers either, but wouldn't it be great if we convinced everybody in America to buy a completely different car made by auto workers? Right. Yes, it would.
The Detroit Free Press says Trump's speech was peppered with exaggerations about his record in protecting auto jobs, but the former president did lay out an argument if one he failed to fully explain. The demands being made by the UAW won't matter if workers and union leaders don't insist that gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles remain a big part of the future because those EVs won't be made in the U.S. He went on to say it's nothing against EVs, but they should remain as an option, not a mandate. That's like the light bulb thing. And again, the people who the Washington Post, ABC poll are missing are the younger voters. And the younger voters, I don't think are going to buy that.
No, they will buy,
they're not going to buy the car,
electric vehicles.
They're not that Trump is trying to sell, and they're not going to try the argument that Trump is trying to sell.
Okay. Yes, probably not.
Trump's visit to Michigan, announced early last week and touted his meeting with current and former union members, came a day after Biden took the historically unprecedented step of joining striking employees on a picket line. So, I think that's reasonable coverage. Could be better, but, it's reasonable.
If you like. It's not the worst in the world, I suppose.
Well, you got to get in there. You're talking about Michigan, so you got to get in. This is a non-union shop.
Yes, well,
this guy was on the picket line.
That's
the
what
other
was
one
happening.
Wasn't. The argument does make a lot of sense. He's exaggerating his claims. That's fine. That's a not unreasonable way of putting it, and it's all true.
Yes. Well, he should have gone there with a Trump salary calculator. If under my administration, put in how much money you make now, you'll make $1 billion.
You're striking over a 40% increase.
Yeah.
But if you evaluate it the way I do Mar-a-Lago, you're actually asking for a 475% increase.
And as a matter of fact,
I think
you
is
just
a little
got
too
it.
much. I think you should scale that down to 455.
Yeah, you people are crazy. Only I get that kind of money. So,
which the CEO, according to my calculation, should get a 1,972% raise this week alone.
Well, he borrowed his calculator from them, so it makes sense. I liked the thing about, though, what people were saying, that I guess, what did he answer in court at some point that led this judge to be so outraged that Mar-a-Lago really was worth that much, because if he wanted to sell it, he could ask the Saudis to buy it, and they would pay him that.
He said that several
times. That was pretty amazing.
Right. The other part that was so amazing, by the way, in that judge looking at Trump says, look, you can't take anything I said seriously because I had the worthless clause.
I don't know what?
What's the worthless clause? The worthless clause is a real estate clause on the first page of every real estate prospectus that says that the valuation is not necessarily what you would get on the market. And Trump says, what that means in English, Judge, is that what I just said is worthless. And therefore, you don't have to take it seriously, and therefore you can't hold me liable for it. And the judge said, you didn't use the word worthless. The worthless doesn't appear in here. You may think it's worthless. I think your argument is worthless.
Okay. You just lost on that one. It was, I see what they're getting at, and I guess, once again, it's sort of a third-grade interpretation of things. I am told by my lawyers that this is like ironclad protection, and it isn't. It doesn't actually work that way, but my lawyers said it was, and I'm not a lawyer, so I believed it the whole time, and I'm shocked that there's a judge telling me I'm wrong, because I'm never wrong. Yeah, I guess this is coming as a surprise to him, but I understand that they put in a thing that say, all right, well, when we put a price tag on property that we're going to sell you, either as a home buyer or an investor, we're evaluating it at some subjective level, but, most people in the market say, well, there has to be some underlying basis for that. You got to get in the ballpark. And Trump is just saying, I'm just warning you ahead of time that it could be wildly off the mark, and that is protection for being caught selling things that are wildly off the mark. And it isn't, because judges will say, there has to be some reasonable expectation that you're even close in the neighborhood, or else the whole economy goes down the tubes, because nobody can trust anything, and we don't want that to happen as a matter of policy. So yeah, we'll hold you liable, even though you have, a disclaimer up front that says, I might be lying my ass off. No.
Well, the funny thing is that's basically the argument that guy in the New York Times was trying to say about they all do it.
Yes.
Yes. So this is the
they
nation
do that.
Handling that. Judge Engoron made similarly short work of the two-pronged paper defense Trump and his attorneys mustered for the billions in dodgy valuations they racked up, the magical disclaimer supposedly stipulating that the estimates applied to bankers, loan officers, and insurers were worthless, and the allied contention that any reasonable financial officer would override such valuations by doing their standard due diligence research. Caveat emptor protects me because, like, if you don't, you're stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Defendants' reliance on these worthless disclaimers is worthless, he said.
That's right.
The clause does not use the word worthless or useless or ignore or disregard or any similar words. It doesn't say the values herein are what I think the properties will be worth in 10 years. Indeed, the quoted language uses current no less than 5 times, future 0 times, and he observes that the due diligence dodge is little more than a license to front-load systemic fraud into any company's business model. Defendant's stance is, practically speaking, they may submit false, suspected fraudulent claims so long as the recipients know from their own due diligence the information's false.
Business law is a weird place. There's a lot of gray areas.
Judge wasn't buying it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the role of the judge. I mean, maybe you have to go to law school or take business law as a non-law school student before you get to classroom discussion about this stuff. That very often there are claims made up front, people making warranties or promises, etc., and they think that that's protection in court. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And occasionally judges will find that the provisions of a contract are unconscionable, right? You say, well, our contract says that you're going to accept without question my valuation of these things, or at least accept that I'm making them up out of thin air. And at some level, and it's up to the judges to take evidence and ponder and consider this stuff on a case-by-case basis. Did you cross the line here into unconscionable terms? And if the answer from the judge is yes, and also from the appeals court, you lose. And you're saying, but I had the contract, I had the clause in the contract. Yeah. And then we examined it in the totality of evidence, and you were this far out from the norm, and we're holding you liable, and other people will get away with it. That's kind of the way it goes.
This was a brilliant opinion. Engoron also added in a footnote, defendants respond that the documents do not say what they say. There's no such thing as objective, and the court should not believe its own eyes. As Chico Marx said, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? That's in his
I know
opinion.
You would love that, right? Yeah. The Marx brothers. He's a Marxist. I knew it at heart. And now that they can go and they can advertise that on TV, and it'll be true. Only the Marxist judge held him liable. Well, okay, but it was Chico Marx.
Anyway, that's a show for today.
It sure is.
We've defeated
as far as you're concerned.
Question as much as we're going to defeat it, at least until it comes up again. But hey, it may come up.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much, Greg. I appreciate it, and we'll be back next week
to vacate some motions.
Right.
Motions to vacate.
Right. Or somebody's going to vacate here. I don't know exactly whether we want that or not. But exciting developments by next meeting. It will be next fiscal year. We'll see about that shutdown. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So midway through that segment, I got a note from Brian Monroe that said, you gotta turn up Greg's volume levels to match mine, to which of course I said, no, I do not. But did it change at all? I bumped it up a little bit. It's hard to know because things sound different on my headphones and I usually have had the levels at what I thought was more or less equal in the past, only to find out that it was coming out funny on the other end. So it's a little difficult to judge. I bumped it up a little bit. I don't know if that made any difference in the last 15 minutes or so. Well, maybe more than that, because he made that request 50 minutes ago, according to Mastodon. And I said, no, I do not, about 23 minutes ago. So, yeah, all right, so the last 15 to 20 minutes of the show, if that made any difference. If it made no difference, we can bump it up again. I could turn my own volume down, I guess. But sometimes I had it equalized, and there were times where then I played some other audio through through the browser, which goes through the same mixer, and it came out, super loud, and I turned it down on the fly, and then it was like when it was time to readjust. Well, first of all, then I forgot, but then when I remembered, I was like, what's the number that it was set to? And I should have all these things written down somewhere. But that suggests a level of professionalism that I think would be ridiculous to expect from someone as unprofessional as me. Well, one day I'll document the whole thing. It's dangerous not to have it documented because, like you should always back up your data, right? Even if that means writing it down with a pencil and paper. So anyway, just wondering, and if anybody noticed any difference, or specifically Brian, if you noticed a difference, or maybe it's your Mexican radio that's screwing things up. I don't know. Anyway, it could be that you brought it. 1, it's not a radio. 2, you probably brought it from Canada. 3, well, who knows? But while we're on the subject of Canadian marketing and materials, I wanted to know whether, have I been taken in by propaganda here? I bought some Tim Hortons coffee over the weekend. We had house guests, and it said on the package that it was Canada's favorite coffee, and I'm just wondering whether that's overstating the case or not. Or whether it's just, maybe you're the kind of person that thinks, well, yeah, most Canadians love that coffee, but they don't know what they're talking about, or something like that. I just want to know where I stand vis-a-vis Canadian marketing tactics. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. We examined the previous question motion. I think people are probably well prepared for that, but it's very difficult to know whether you've done a good enough job explaining what the hell that thing is, especially when the terminology lends itself to confusion, and when slang or shorthand terms for like people say, well, we'll defeat the previous question. Well, it's not the previous question that you're defeating. It's the motion to consider the already pending question. This, just like reconciliation, causes a lot of problems in terms of getting confused about its use as a term of art versus the generalized meaning of words like previous and question. Right. They mean something specific as a term of art. All right. Well, if not, we're here for another hour. You could ask for more explanation. We're here tomorrow, so you can chime in and say, I didn't quite get it. Or we could wait until after the action and see whether it even happens. And then if it does happen and you're still confused by it, we can discuss it more next week. The other thing, let's see, worthy of consideration, there's nothing else. That's really basically about it. We have lots of stories stuffed in pocket, metaphorically. They're not in my actual literal pockets. They're in my Pocket app, and we'll go back and take a look at some of them. But yeah, I was fascinated by the word from the New York courts yesterday. Business law, it's a weird thing. We've talked a little bit about it before and how much protection business people get for doing guesswork, and business opinions and things that are given deference in order to allow the economy to work. But by the same token, where the business decision rule sometimes protects very poor decisions, even when shareholders are suing officers and directors of the company for doing things that cost them money because it drives the stock price down. And they're able to defend themselves saying, well, it was a bit of a gamble, but somebody has to make the decisions around here. And we legitimately thought that the thing we were doing would be good for business. It turned out we were wrong, but that doesn't mean you can sue us and hold us personally liable every time if we can convince a court that we were making a rational decision to try this thing that we thought would be good for the business on the whole. Even if we knew ahead of time it wouldn't be positive for the stock price in the short term, we thought that it might be better for the stock price in the long term because it would be good for the long-term health of the company. You run into problems when it's stuff like, well, I thought it would be good for the company to liquidate all of our assets from our plant in Chicago and give them to me, the CEO, to buy a yacht with. Like, if you can convince a jury that that was good for it was a business decision, and hey, I thought it would work out better and it just didn't. If the jury believes it, then fine. But most juries won't. But that's a defense that's available to you. You say, I genuinely thought that this would be good for the business. If there's no evidence that backs that up, you'll lose your case. If there's evidence that backs it up and convinces the jury, you can win your case. It's a gray area. And I guess sort of the flip side or an accompanying rule in all of that is contract provisions like the one Trump is talking about being a disclaimer and letting you off the hook for things. Like, for instance, as a consumer, you've probably run into things when you're every time an app updates or your OS operates and you gotta, acknowledge that you've read and accepted the new terms, but you really don't have any choice. Even if you actually did sit there and read the terms, and most people don't, but if you did read them and you found things objectionable, like there's no opportunity for you to say, no, I want to negotiate with Microsoft or Apple over this provision. It's take it or leave it kind of a thing. And the gray area here is very often the companies are saying, well, although we understand the concept here, 99 times out of 100, the powerless consumer will say, I don't really have any choice here. I can't make objections. And even if I did and I went to court and sued them about it, they would point to this thing and say, look, you accepted these terms, or, we offered you the chance to negotiate over the terms, or you just didn't take it, or whatever. But sometimes even checking the box and saying, yes, I accept these terms isn't the end of the story. Like if the right or whatever, the power that the company is claiming to have here is something they're not entitled to or is otherwise unconscionable. Like occasionally they'll say things like, well, by checking this box here so that you can continue to use QuickBooks, we own all intellectual property that is on your computer locally or stored on the cloud, whether it was generated with QuickBooks or not. Like we'll slip that by because we'll put it in gobbledygook in the middle of the terms of service without checking that you can't balance your checkbooks anymore. So, of course, you're going to check it and move on and just hope there's not anything outrageous in there, right? And then you find it because, we make claims as QuickBooks. We own all your intellectual property, and you wrote a hit movie on your computer and made $1 billion. Well, that $1 billion belongs to us because we claimed the right to all intellectual property on your computer as so long as there was also QuickBooks on your computer. And it says right here that you accept that, and what they're hoping is that people will say, oh, damn it, I've been hoodwinked. But there it is right there, my name on the contract saying they own it. Shoot, I guess I'm out of luck. Well, when there's $1 billion at stake, most people realize, no, I'm not going to just sit here and settle for that. I'm going to get a lawyer. And you'll confer with a lawyer, and a lawyer will tell you, well, that's actually an unconscionable contract clause. There's no reason in the world, in a normal course of business, why anybody would expect that would be there, whether you examined it or not. And the fact that they make the claim they make is baseless. The only quote unquote right they have to this money is they hoodwinked you, forced you, coerced you, hid from you, whatever, this weird provision that has no basis in general Western understanding of law and ownership. So that's unconscionable, especially since they forced you to sign that under duress because you wouldn't be able to balance your own checkbook anymore unless you checked this thing. And there was not even any human involved in that transaction. You were presented this contract by a computer, and the computer isn't going to make any humanitarian decisions to let you go ahead and have access to your own checkbook because this thing is unconscionable. That's for judges to decide, right? So once you get to court, you won't get to court if there's $10 at stake because people will come to realize that it's not worth the candle, this game, any longer, because even if you recover the $10, so what? You're going to spend $1,000 in court. And sometimes companies just do that to you, and they take that $10 away from you because they know it's not worth it to you to fight, and they have 1 million customers, and they're going to make $10 million this way. But like when you do get to court, yes, you can in fact go in there in the face of the company saying, I'm sorry, but I gave you the contract in writing. I made you check a box that said you'd read and understood the contract, and then I made you accept the contract by agreeing to continue to use the product, and it's all there in black and white, and you complied. Well, if a judge says that, it is $10 and they have a reasonable excuse as to why they should charge you the $10, then it's not going to be unconscionable. If it's $1 billion and there's no logical basis for it, then it will be unconscionable. And they will say, yes, you have a contract. Yes, you agreed. Yes, you said you read it. It still doesn't matter. As a matter of equity, the court says no to this contract clause. And that's essentially what's happening here with the Trump things. Yes, you said in the contract up front that by signing this agreement, you acknowledge that we may have made these things up. And if we made it up and we've overvalued it by $10, it's not unconscionable and you're out of luck. If we made it up and we overvalued things by 2,300%, that might be approaching unconscionable and it's just not enforceable against anybody. And that's the basics of it, right? You come to court and you ask the court to enforce this paper. And that's all it is, right? Without the force of law behind it, without a court agreeing that it will step in on your behalf and enforce this contract, then the contract is worthless, not the provision, declaring other things worthless, but the contract provision itself can be declared worthless. The courts are the ones who get to decide whether this is just a piece of paper or something that you can get yourself fined, sanctioned, or thrown in jail over. And this time they decided the other way, and Trump doesn't win. That's the way the cookie crumbles in court. Sorry, but yeah, at some level, everything's an abstraction and it's just down to the judge deciding what they think here. And the backstop for that being done in corrupt or political fashion is that you can appeal and appeal the appeal as well. And it only becomes a problem when, let's say one political party has rigged the courts from top to bottom such that the value of an appeal is diminished or non-existent. And that is a problem. And judge shopping and forum shopping exacerbate those problems. We've been over those issues in the past as well. But, and it only presents a problem for idiots like Trump, who, as I've said, have sort of a third grade understanding of things that either comes from, well, I've gotten away with this before, and so I'll get away with it again. Or other people have this provision. Yeah, but they don't have that provision. Or, yes, you have the identical provisions, but they did different things and valued their properties differently and more sanely. Others would still, argue that they went above and beyond and possibly broke the law or crossed the line into unconscionability. But so far, no judge has said so. The fact that you think that your valuation of your properties, or you're willing to claim in court that the way you valued your properties is on a par with other people who have not had judgments entered against them, is an interesting notion, but it's not dispositive. Just because you claim it doesn't mean you get it. You make the claim to a judge who decides, is that a good claim or is that a bad claim? And today you got a judge that says it's a bad claim. If you think I'm the only one that would do that, appeal your case. Then 3 judges will get together and say, no, we also think that the first judge was right. If you don't like that, you appeal it again. And then 9 judges get together and say, no, we kind of think that the first judge was right, and so were the 3 judges after that. And once you lose, then, of course, all that's left to you is to say, it's all rigged and I'm going to give myself a pardon, or I'm going to say, once I was president and so therefore I'm entitled to do whatever I want. And then eventually somebody says, I'm sorry, it's the padded cell for you. That's what the law is at bottom. It's not particularly stable unless you do it the same-ish way over and over again, and that's why it's kind of important to have rule of law and consistency and stare decisis, as we've invoked the phrase a couple of times. But that's what makes it That's what makes it work, and that's what makes a capitalistic economy work to the extent that it works at all. You need to be able to have some ability to predict how will things come out, and that's why you want apolitical judges, because once you come to understand the logic of a decision, you should be able to apply it across the board without having to calculate, but will logic be stood on its head because that guy is a Republican or not? Okay. Thus endeth, I guess, here endeth the political science lesson. And now on to other news stories of the day. Although maybe I should check back to see how we did on the volume question. No answer. So maybe I turned my own volume down so much that Brian thinks the show is over. I don't know. Or maybe he couldn't tell. That's more likely. So what do we got in pocket that's worth sharing? Let's see. Well, one we already covered, which was this article that I put away from the Hill. McCarthy told conference he won't allow a vote on the Senate stopgap, according to GOP lawmakers. And that's how we got to the previous question discussion. That's sort of a step ahead of it. But there's no reason to discuss defeating the previous question until you find out that McCarthy is saying he won't bring this thing to the floor. I have a feeling that I put this away for a different reason, but now I can't think of what that reason was. And most of the stuff here has been covered, and right down to the use of quotes from Don Bacon here. So okay, I think we're good on that one. Yesterday, one of the subjects that came up, and let me check back in on my email too, because I mentioned that Gil had emailed about the Alabama issue, and I think we didn't really go to it, but I put an article aside that I thought was of interest, and that actually Greg, I think, earmarked yesterday too, and I don't know that we spent a lot of time on it beyond citing the headline, and it might be helpful in looking at this. Gil had said the Alabama, I thought the Alabama thing was the last chance before a court-mandated map was automatically instituted. That would be, you would think, a sensible route to the end of it, but it's not clear that that's the path they'll take. But then he also has sent along something else here. According to this article from CNN, and let's open it up. The headliner, Special Master in Alabama redistricting case proposes 3 House maps in a closely watched voting rights fight. And that is a relatively current piece, September 25th. So I guess that's what he's thinking about when we're talking about imposing a map. It would be from a special master who had been assigned to the task, right? You know, one of the problems with the let's enforce a different map over and above the unwillingness of the Alabama legislature to adopt one, even on our orders, as we could say, we could impose a map, but what map? And who would have the authority to draw such a map? And one answer would be a special master appointed by the court. That's true. But I thought we could, I don't know that they're diverging views, these two articles, but I think perhaps we would be well served to look at the one that Greg offered up, but we didn't go beyond the headline, which was from Vox. Ian Millhiser, who usually has a pretty good view of how these things work, writing under the headline of "The Supreme Court just told Alabama to shut up and listen." Okay, but listen to who? And I think Gilbert has correctly identified the answer to that one. The answer is the special master, I suppose. So let's take a look at the way Ian explains this thing. The subheader here goes on to say, after shut up and listen, the Alabama GOP will have to comply with a Supreme Court order striking down its racially gerrymandered map. And I guess now we'll begin to see why, if we give him a chance to explain. The Supreme Court handed down 2 very brief orders, 2 on Tuesday, informing the state of Alabama that no, it is not allowed to defy one of the court's decisions on gerrymandering. So how does it intend to enforce it? In June, in one of the most surprising decisions the court has handed down in years, the justices voted 5-4 to affirm a lower court decision striking down Alabama's congressional maps. The courts ordered the state to draw new maps that include at least 2 districts where black voters can elect their candidates of choice. African Americans make up about 27% of the state's population, and Alabama has 7 congressional districts. So if the state has 2 black districts, that would give black voters representation that is roughly proportional to their population. Both the lower court decision and the Supreme Court's decision affirming it in Allen versus Milligan, that's the name of the case, were uncontroversial under long-standing precedents interpreting the Federal Voting Rights Act. But the court's Republican-appointed majority has historically been very hostile toward voting rights plaintiffs generally, and toward the Voting Rights Act in particular. Alabama's lawyers litigated this case with that history seemingly front and center in their minds, acting as if they had the Supreme Court in their back pocket. And after all, that's meant to be the assumption that Republicans work with now that they have been campaigning so hard to impose a majority there. But as it turns out, there's a little bit more here. Alabama's lawyers litigated this case thinking that they were going to win. Essentially, the first time the Milligan case was before the justices, the state's lawyers proposed several ways to read the Voting Rights Act that would effectively eliminate its safeguards against racial gerrymandering, which is a weird thing to do with the Voting Rights Act because it was passed to actually protect against racial gerrymandering, and they thought this is an opportunity to argue the argument that will result in all those liberals being declared pre-wrong about that stuff. Yes, the Voting Rights Act, people think it was passed to give others voting rights because it's in the title. But in fact, you're pre-wrong. This is actually a law designed to allow further discrimination in states like Alabama to make sure that black people are not adequately represented. I know you learned the opposite in history books, but that's because they had a liberal bias. We now ban those books. Let's burn them. And no discussion of the prior history because that's going to make people embarrassed to be white. So our new laws say that's not allowed. You can't tell people what the actual history was. And in fact, everyone's pre-wrong about the contents of the Voting Rights Act. And they just tried that. And as it turns out, in a bit of a surprise, 5 justices rejected this effort to rewrite the law in that June opinion, with Chief Justice John Roberts writing that Alabama's proposed rules run headlong into our precedent. Stare decisis. Let the law stand and let there be logic that is applicable across time and across cases so that people can make decisions about how to run their lives, run their businesses, etc., etc. That's the logic of the common law and stare decisis. And what do you know? Chief Justice John Roberts said, we think that voting rights should mean that people have voting rights, which was a surprise because he had previously said, we think that the Voting Rights Act doesn't even necessarily have a place in modern society at one point. And then that was super embarrassing because Alabama took that to mean that they could do this. And John Roberts is like, now it makes us look like we were idiots for thinking racism was over. You were, so let's fix it. It was just a surprise that he said, let's fix it, as opposed to let's just destroy voting rights forever. Nevertheless, Alabama still refused to comply with the court's order. They figured, this is an anomaly. He made a mistake. Once we bring it back to him and he realizes he has an opportunity to destroy voting rights forever, he'll take it, right? So back they come. Alabama refuses to comply, drawing a new map that contained only one district where black voters could elect the candidate of their choice. The state then asked the Supreme Court to allow this new map to go into effect because while the state did not actually comply with the court's order, it did make some changes to the maps, and those changes touched upon some minor issues in the case that the court mentioned in its June decision. Isn't that enough? On Tuesday, the court told Alabama it wasn't going to accept this defiance. Because there are technically 2 separate lawsuits challenging Alabama's maps, the justices handed down 2 identical orders informing Alabama that it must comply with the court's June decision. Both orders were only 1 sentence long. just like the conservatives say they love, just one thing only. The application for stay presented to Justice Thomas and by him referred to the court is denied, and no justices publicly dissented from that order. It is still unclear whether this represents a meaningful shift in the court's approach to voting rights. In a separate concurring opinion attached to the court's June decision, Justice Brett Kavanaugh suggested that he thinks the Voting Rights Act's protections against racial gerrymandering should have a sunset date. So it is still possible that Kavanaugh will flip on his vote and join the 4 justices who dissented in June at some future case, if he thinks the sunset date has passed or is approaching, or the one he would suggest that the law have. It doesn't have one. He just wishes it did. The court also plans to hear another racial gerrymandering case, Alexander versus South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP, in October. The court's decision in that case is likely to offer another window into whether the justices are shifting toward a more pro-democracy posture or whether the June Milligan decision was just a one-off. We will find out then. At the very least, however, Tuesday's order suggests that the justices understand that they cannot allow a state to openly defy the court's decisions once those decisions are handed down. So really they're more about the mechanics of the Supreme Court's not so much about the mechanics of their power, but about the concept of their power. Now we get to the mechanics, I think, if I'm right about what's in the article that Gil has on offer, next, after the break.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got the next article lined up here. I think that this will answer some further questions. The question left open, and I think the one that maybe Gil had and maybe has been answered by this article, but maybe you have the same question, is, okay, we've made a big deal out of this, right? The Supreme Court says you can't defy our order. And Alabama says there are so many ways that we could defy your orders. I think it's an open question. Well, you say you have to go and fix this thing because the law says so. And what if Alabama just doesn't, claims that, well, we just didn't get to it. We were very, very busy. And we just didn't. Like, what mechanisms are there for the court to say, no, this has to happen? And will they use them is another question. So I think this might get at things here, but I haven't read it yet. But we're going to find out together whether the article at CNN, Special Master in Alabama Redistricting Case proposes 3 House maps in a closely watched voting rights fight. We're closely watching it, but then what happens? A court-appointed special master offered 3 proposals on Monday to boost the black voting age population in a reconfigured Alabama congressional district, the latest development in a closely watched redistricting case with implications for, of course, the control of the U.S. House of Representatives after next year's elections. I mean, overshadowing all of this is the extremely tight margins by which Republicans currently control the House of Representatives, even though overwhelmingly across the country, there are more ballots cast for Democrats than Republicans. And as a result of gerrymandering in each of the states, especially unfair gerrymandering, we very often see far more Republicans in Congress than they ought otherwise to be entitled to, if your measure is, well, how many people vote for Democrats versus how many people vote for Republicans, both in the states and in the country at large. And that doesn't even get to the racial question of whether or not black voters, Republican or Democrat, if there are any Republican, there are certainly some, ever get a chance to vote for the candidate of their choice, regardless of party. But it would certainly be much more likely that there would be a different mix of Democrats and Republicans of any race in the House of Representatives if the lines were drawn more fairly. Anyway, so what about enforcing the court's order here? The maps drafted by Special Master Richard Allen and his team, and I guess we're just meant to they're not going to dive into the full background, maybe, in this case of who is Richard Allen and where did he come from. But I guess suffice to say, you don't just walk into an office one day and declare yourself a special master. Someone else has to do that for you. And the only people that can appoint special master, I mean, if the law means anything, and, we're not sure that it does, and under perhaps a second Trump administration, it might not. Maybe he would declare himself to have the right, Donald Trump, as president, to appoint special masters. Well, it's not traditionally the case, but who's to stop him if he were to insist that that was the case? Well, the courts could stop him, but it might take more than 4 years to do it. And in the meantime, we'd have people running around saying, I'm a special master. I'm an elector. I'm a special master. I'm the Attorney General. I'm the acting, double secret Attorney General, what have you. I mean, that's the problem with administrations that don't believe in the rule of law. But in this case, a special master appointed by the court was asked to draft these maps, and they did draft 3 different ones, I guess. They were submitted, these maps, to a 3-judge panel that is drawing new congressional lines in Alabama after state lawmakers defied federal court orders to create a second congressional district in which black voters could make up a majority or at least come close to it. So there's some of the answer. Why is Richard Allen the special master? The 3-judge panel, and that usually suggests a federal appeals court. That's where, you see 3-judge panels sitting. So they must have said, all right, we'll appoint a special master and let them do the hard work of figuring out what the map should look like and giving us 3 options. And we can say that we'll enforce the Supreme Court's order by issuing our own order with their backing, since they will have remanded the case to us by not agreeing to take up the consideration of a stay. That means we return to the status quo, which is we were in the middle of an appeal being heard by the 3-judge federal appeals court panel here, and now back to you, right? We appeal to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis. Supreme Court says no. Back to where we were. The 3-judge panel says, great, all right, the special master that we've appointed will give us 3 options, and we'll choose from among them. And we'll tell Alabama that they have to conduct the election this way. But I guess there's still the problem of, what if Alabama says, F you 3-judge panel? I don't know yet. But the stage we're at now is that the special master has drafted 3 different options and is giving them to the court. Currently, only one of Alabama's 7 congressional districts is majority black, reciting the problem here, although black residents make up 27% of the state's population. You're left to do the math on your own, and in case that's not immediately obvious to you, as it isn't to me, although I know how to convert 1/8 into decimals, and that was about 12.5%. But 1 out of 7 districts means 14% of the state's representation will have been elected by a majority black district. If there's 27% black population, and only 14% on offer in the representation. That is a serious undercount and underrepresentation. There should be, if there were two, if 1 out of 7 is 14%, 2 out of 7 would be 28%, and that's a lot closer to 27% than 14% is, and that's why they think there needs to be 2. They did the math. So, let's see. This, however, would, as they state here, threaten Republicans' narrow majority in the House of Representatives. There's only a seat or 2 here, and if one more of them turns over into control by black voters, well, they're afraid that black voters will vote for Democrats, and that'll throw them out of the majority in the House. That's why they're fighting so hard. Now, one of the maps submitted by Allen would create a second congressional district, which is supposedly required. Does that suggest that 2 of them do not? Yeah, I guess not. That's interesting too. So, I mean, it's not like the special master is some wild-eyed progressive liberal from out of state imposing some solutions that just are wildly out of keeping with what's going on in Alabama among white people who govern it anyway. Right, so only one of the maps submitted by Allen would create a second congressional district in southeastern Alabama, with a 50.1% black voting age population. So that's like the bare minimum, right, that you could possibly ask for out of this. Well, we think there should be a second district where they have a controlling majority or close to it. And 50.1% is not exactly a controlling majority, but it is a majority. It's the smallest possible majority, 50.1%. 2 other plans for the district would put the black population at this new district at either 48.7 or 48.5% of the voting population there. And that would still at least probably comply with the Supreme Court's order that there be something close to a black majority. All exceed the roughly 40% black population in the second district that had been proposed by Alabama officials and rejected by the federal judges as improperly diluting black political power in this deep South state. Is that right? Deuel Ross? Is that how you would pronounce his name? D-E-U-E-L. Deuel? Maybe. Deuel Ross, Deputy Director of Litigation at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and the attorney for some of the plaintiffs in the case, said, what does he make of it? He's pleased to see that the plan boosting the population to 50.1% hewed closely to one submitted by his team. So even the NAACP here, if you think they're the wild-eyed liberals, they are only coming back with a plan that puts a second black congressional district in the neighborhood of about just barely a majority. They're not asking to be 60% majority in this district. They just want a fighting chance. And all right, so some alignment between what the plaintiffs are asking for and what the courts are giving them. The plaintiffs were still evaluating the other 2 alternatives, he said. Kareem Creighton, the redistricting expert at liberal-leaning Brennan Center for Justice and an Alabama native, or one of several experts, said the special master had clearly been guided by the 3-judge panel's admonition to devise a majority black district or something close to it. But, he noted, the line-drawing team also made clear that they had not considered racial population data in devising the maps, likely an effort to insulate their proposals from attacks that they engaged in race-predominant redistricting. So that's interesting, too. I mean, the door is open to doing that, but I guess they used other factors that aren't racial on their face, but which just so happens to have the effect of designing a district that, if you did measure the racial population demographics here, you would find that it's 50.1% black, as it turns out. We were doing it by home size, but just so happens, I don't know what their credentials were, but maybe they were trying to draw more compact districts, and that also happened to result in, I don't know, but they were doing it on a basis that they hoped would not be subject to Republican attacks, which may or may not find any favor in the courts, but you can anticipate Republican attacks that say this is reverse racism, and in this atmosphere where they are successfully able to attack diversity, equity, and inclusion curricula, or even just paying any attention to it, even if it's not in a school setting. Anybody who would pay attention to anything like diversity, a company that would have a diversity policy, is now reverse racist, and it doesn't stand to reason and hasn't made any advances in most courts, but it's attackable on political basis. They want perhaps to avoid that as much as they can. But in doing so, the question is, have you done a service to the parties that have been injured here? Asks Kareem Creighton. Now, a spokesperson for the Alabama Secretary of State, Wes Allen, that's the Secretary of State, I guess, not the spokesperson, said Monday evening that the officials there had just received the proposals and were still reviewing them. The redistricting fight has captured national attention. Of course, back in June, a case concerning an earlier map divided the Supreme Court, and that divided court affirmed the lower court opinion ordering Alabama to include a second majority black district, or something quite close to it, in its 7-seat congressional map. The 5-4 opinion was penned by Chief Justice John Roberts, who drew the votes of fellow conservative Justice Brett Kavanaugh, as well as the court's 3 liberal justices. But when Alabama produced its new map in July, it came under immediate legal challenge because the state once again declined to create that second majority black district. State legislators instead simply increased the black voting percentage to roughly 40% in one of the state's white majority districts. That ain't much. And it doesn't answer the question, or it doesn't meet the challenge. The same 3-judge panel, which had overseen the case before it reached the Supreme Court the first time, wrote that it was disturbed by Alabama's actions in the case and invalidated the map. It had ordered a special master to propose several new maps by Monday, and I guess they did. Those federal judges are slated to hold an October 3rd hearing on the maps, and that's now right around the corner. But even as the lower court presses ahead with plans to approve a map that can take effect before the 2024 elections, that's the hope, Alabama officials are attempting to overturn the lower court's decision anyway. They have asked the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene to put the lower court ruling on pause. The high court has not yet ruled on that request. But wait a second, this is dated Monday, September 25th, and then was it on Tuesday that they finally did say, all right, we will rule on that? No. Okay. So I guess that brings us up to date. We have found the answer to that one. Plaintiffs in the case have accused Alabama of unabashedly defying federal courts. Alabama officials deny that, saying they've followed traditional redistricting practices and cannot elevate race above other considerations when deciding congressional maps. The old reverse racism excuse. The state of Alabama has been maligned as engaging in open rebellion. State Attorney General Steve Marshall wrote in a recent filing before the High Court. Marshall, a Republican, has argued that the state legislature's map keeps communities of interest, whatever that may be, intact. The maps released Monday are a sign of progress, said Ross, the attorney for some of the plaintiffs. We're glad to see the case is moving forward. Our hope and expectation is that the Supreme Court will not step in. And, at least that they leave things as they are for now and let the appeals court accept or reject one or another of the special masters maps and just say, we order the state election officials to proceed in 2024 along these lines instead, and hope that Alabama will actually do it. But I guess it explains the mechanics of who the special master is and how he got to be the special master and what his powers are according to the court. Now, what remains to be seen is what are his powers according to Alabama and what they think about this. Could they... they're saying we're not in open defiance. We're not in open rebellion against this, but we might be later is a possibility. So, all right, just still watching. It's not over till it's over, I guess. And my assumption is that Alabama the state officials elected by the white people of Alabama, essentially, are probably interested in seeing if they can kick the can further down the road and say, golly, there's still some complicated legal issues here, and it's just not our fault that they haven't been settled, and it is now October 2024, and the election is coming in a month, and even earlier than that. Once it gets to be January 2024, they'll say, this is too close. We're in an election year. You can't redraw the maps now. We'll just have to wait until this litigation gets settled, and maybe we'll have some maps in place for 2026, and we'll see whether that strategy continues to work for them. All right, let's see. I've got a couple other listener inputs to check in on. David Paquette wrote the other day, and now this is interesting, an interesting phenomenon. 3 people have written in, and then there was a second follow-up email from all 3 of them. So I feel obligated to take a look and see if we're meeting the community's needs here. First, David had written the other day, I have a couple of questions that may seem obvious to you. Well, we'll see. But have been puzzling to me. If one of McCarthy's bomb throwers introduces a motion to vacate, they're not McCarthy's bomb throwers, but doesn't really matter. But he probably has bomb throwers of his own. That's probably not what you mean. Like if Gates introduces a motion to vacate, it would require a majority vote of the House to boot him out. True, right? Okay. Obviously, if it came to that, the Chaos Caucus would vote aye, but if only Republicans voted in favor, it would require all but 3 or 4 of them to pass it, right? Yes, okay, that's true. So, my 2-part question, do you think it's even possible that virtually the entire House GOP will vote to vacate? Not at this stage of the game, I wouldn't guess. And what do Democrats do and why? Okay. Please feel free to speculate irresponsibly on KITM. That's definitely what we're doing. And we have been through this. This is, and talked about it both with Joan and with Greg. It's not entirely clear what Democrats would want to do in this situation, but the more likely outcome is that they vote against, at least initially, a motion to vacate because vacating the chair just creates more chaos and less ability to predict what's going on and less ability to actually do anything until it puts them right back in the position they were in January, having multiple ballots over and over again and unable to do anything until someone is in the speakership. And, that's not particularly good for Democrats. It's not a great thing. No Democrats want to vote to keep a Republican in the chair. But the plain fact of it is that it's almost impossible to put a Democrat in the chair. So it's better to keep this ineffectual idiot, I guess, in the chair than to open it up to the possibility either that no one is in the chair and no business can be done, and the government shuts down and can never open again because they can't organize to take a vote, or allow McCarthy to nominally occupy the seat, and it doesn't solve the problem of there being chaos in how the floor is run, but at least the chaos is what bills will come to the floor and when, as opposed to the chaos of we don't even know who to ask that question of, and no other questions can be asked. Like Kevin McCarthy could answer the question poorly about what bills are coming to the floor, but at least they would know what they were doing the next day and what bills they were voting on and could prepare to do that, versus we don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, except that we're going to spend all day continuing to vote over and over again to put someone else in the chair, and nobody's going to get enough votes. But I don't know that their patience with McCarthy lasts forever. I don't know that they're willing to bail him out after 17 such votes. I don't know. So, okay, it's just weird. All right, and then he says, because I listened to KITM about one day after it first airs, I did not realize until just now that you had answered my questions about 2 hours before I sat down to write the email yesterday. In the immortal words of Emily Latella, never mind. And so I should not have minded again now. I should have read on ahead of time, but I think that reiterates the questions. But the good news is David won't find out that I just wasted 5 minutes on this until tomorrow, probably. The rest of you saw it happen in real time. Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we are answering all of the questions posed to us that we possibly could. But I know that there's another one hanging out here somewhere. First, I got to get rid of some of the junk mail that sits in the way of even finding those things. If I'm remembering correctly, it is Jeremy Freiberger, and I'll scroll back, and there we go. His two questions posed. Let's see. Where are we first? The first question, while catching up on weekend reading, I just consumed an article from the National Review, highlighted it by Greg in Wednesday's Pundit Roundup. Was it last Wednesday? Because this is originally, this email is from Sunday. And he's talking about the article from, it's not the National Review, it's the New Republic. Sometimes frequently mistaken for the National Review. National Review is the old ultra-conservative publication. The New Republic, they're relatively conservative as Democrats go, but still Democratic-leaning publication. Which one is it? The Two Medias. Remember that one? Greg did bring it up. We have two medias in this country, and they're going to elect Donald Trump. I do recall this being among Greg's offerings one day, but I don't remember exactly how much time we spent reading this Michael Tomasky piece from September 18th. If the press doesn't get involved in the civic health of the nation, there may not be a nation in which a free press might reside. A commonly addressed theme. So what is Jeremy's question here? He read this over the weekend and said, I don't remember the article being discussed on your show last week. It was mentioned, but I don't know how long we lingered on it. Anyway, for those of us who continually wonder why the national mood, sour, isn't more aligned with economic data and Joe Biden's impressive accomplishments, this article is a solid explainer/reminder. So if you're looking for that, we'll offer it up and share it with everybody to make sure everybody else has a chance to read through it too. Meanwhile, I have to wonder by the fairness doctrine termination decision from a 3-judge, wink wink, D.C. Circuit panel, which included among the 3 judges, it's one thing to say, well, you know, the backstop against corrupt judge doing whatever the hell he wants is that it gets reviewed by a 3-judge panel. In this case, it should be noted that the 3-judge panel included both Scalia and Bork. That's some panel. And just the question posed here, why wasn't the invalidation of the fairness doctrine reviewed en banc by the entire D.C. Circuit and even the Supreme Court? I don't remember the procedural posture of the case, so I certainly can't answer that question offhand, but it does make you wonder, well, why should Scalia and Bork be allowed to have the final say on something like this? It's a good question. But the fairness doctrine has been dead for so long that I haven't given it a great deal of thought. But perhaps one day we could do that thought experiment. And then a follow-up question from just yesterday in which he says, in self-deprecating style, call me slow, but it just occurred to me that the central focus and intent of Trump's first impeachment, totally different subject now. This is an interesting one now. The central focus and intent of Trump's first impeachment, Ukraine, right? His corrupt behind-the-scenes plot to have Ukraine investigate the Bidens in order to sway the 2020 election in Trump's favor has been, he's right here, recreated in broad daylight by various GOP-led House committees. Same plot, same fact-free basis, same corruption. That's absolutely true. Not particularly slow. It's quite right. How is it that the first version is an impeachable offense, whereas version 2.0 not only gets a pass, but also gets breathless, serious coverage? Perhaps most mainstream journalists are as slow as I am, but one would think that at least some of them could see these two scams not only as one and the same, but also as equally vile. Yes, not viable, but vile. Yeah, they should be able to see that. Yes, it is in fact the same thing. The only real difference here is that the Republican president did this in order to influence the outcome of the 2020 elections in the face of a Democratic House and Democratic Senate where there was and they had a weapon to use against him, impeachment, and they had the numbers to use it. Here, members of the House and Senate who are interested in using the same play are not subject to impeachment. There are checks and balances against them. They could be ejected from the House, but they're not going to be because that requires a 2/3 majority. And, of course, in the House, where people are doing this investigating, the Republicans control. The Senate is controlled by Democrats. They're not doing this stuff. But at any rate, they're not subject to impeachment. Control of the House has switched over. And now why is it that journalists are not seeing it for what it is? Any number of reasons. Some of them, of course, are seeing it for what it is. More of them than you might expect, as a matter of fact. But the problem with it is that there's, the Republican control of the House allows them to dress this up with legitimacy that they didn't have the first time. Although it was the presidency making these claims, and they were doing it with suits and ties and all the things that you're supposed to be doing it with, and that they're doing it with now in the House, even though Jim Jordan doesn't wear jackets. And by the way, where's the dress code decorum crybabies now about that one? Anyway, they're entitled to do this, and they can do it with the imprimatur of the House of Representatives. They can call committee meetings and have transcripts made, and they have gavels and the whole bit, and so it looks like something that is entitled to breathless coverage. Now, you might ask, though, why it wasn't the case with but I think they really thought that it would be covered the same way when the president and his team were doing it. The problem that they were presented with that maybe they didn't anticipate was that they could be impeached by a Democratic House for doing it, and that changes the nature of the game. Now it has to be breathlessly covered that an impeachment is underway, which is bad news because pretty soon there will be another impeachment underway because the Republicans plan to impeach Biden. Their idea is, well, if all it takes to get breathless coverage as serious is to do something along official channels, no matter how crazy it is, then we'll just do that. Except it wasn't crazy so much when Democrats were doing it against Trump, because it's really ought to be against the rules to do that if you're actually doing those things. Now, if you're not actually doing those things, it ought to be against the law to impeach you for it.
Radio.com.
But it isn't.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, that's the power of the gavel. We explained the power of the judicial gavel, and, of course, we've always explained the power of the legislative gavel. It's pretty much the same either way. Grabthar's hammer is this great gavel, and now you know the awful truth about the gray areas in the law. How about if Justice explains some more of them to you next?